Welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast, a podcast on a mission to bring you some of the most amazing women I know who are doing incredible things to generally make the world a better place. From corporate sustainability to straight up magic and everything in between, you'll meet the real life humans who are birthing the new. I'm your host, Liz Best, and I'm here to amplify the stories and voices of women who are changing the world. Welcome to another new episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Today, I am so excited to sit down with Drew Taylor Cohen. Drew is a values and authenticity coach at Chosen Directions, where she guides people to discover your chosen values and develop a roadmap for living authentically. Through one-on-one coaching, she partners with people in transition to explore who you are, what's important to you, and what you aspire toward to gain clarity and confidence to pursue a values-aligned career, relationships that are energizing, and a life that honors your authenticity. Born from her experiences, she developed and leads the How to Live Authentically workshop. This workshop and accompanying workbook use a proven framework to guide participants to reflect on, select, and integrate your chosen values to pursue and achieve your goals in alignment with what you value most. Drew also leverages her expertise through freelance impact consulting, where she helps purpose-driven organizations like GCC craft strategies, communications, and operations to create an impact on humanity and the planet. She's a dog mom to a 1-year-old boxer dog named Carl Dean, a proud auntie to 4 nieces and nephews, and resides in Nashville, Tennessee. Drew and I had so much fun talking about chosen values, how you can choose your values, and how to meaningfully incorporate your values into your life, work, and relationships once you've chosen them. We also talked about values and community, the hardest parts of personal development and growth, and so much more. I cannot wait for you to listen to my conversation with Drew. Hi, I am so excited to have you here on the podcast today, Drew. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you.
We have so much juicy stuff to talk about today. Maybe before we get into it, would you mind just briefly introducing yourself to our listeners?
I'm Drew. I'm a values and authenticity coach. I work with people at a crossroads to develop a strong internal compass so they can pursue their next steps with clarity and with confidence. And I'm also an impact consultant. So I partner with purpose-driven organizations to create strategies, communications, operations that create a positive impact on humanity and the planet, which includes you and the Girls Club Collective. And I'm so lucky to get to partner with you.
Totally. I'm so lucky. For those of you listening who don't know, I've gotten to work with Drew for, almost coming up on a year now in a Girls Club Collective capacity, and much longer than that in a ESG consulting capacity. And Drew has been so instrumental in helping me get some of the ops and strategy stuff that feels really important for our community out of my brain and onto digital paper and into processes. And it's really awesome. But I know we're not here to talk about that today, although we might get into it a little bit later. I'm so excited to talk more about your work at Chosen Directions and what you do there. So would really love to hear a little bit more about your business and what you've been building.
Yeah, so I help people at Chosen Directions who are, like I said, experiencing or anticipating a transition in life and really exploring who they are to discover how to live more authentically. And these big changes could look like they're leaving a misaligned relationship, they're pursuing a career that really lights them up, they might be moving and preparing for a big move, or even becoming a parent for the very first time. And really thinking about these decisions with purpose. These big changes can have some fear tucked into them, especially if you're not clear on what's driving you, or if you're used to putting other people first or really being worried about what other people think. And so I work with clients in one-on-one coaching and in my How to Live Authentically workshop. And we partner together to start to explore who they really are. And through that process, they discover their chosen values that will guide them in these transitions in their life. Really discover that person that they were always meant to be.
Uh, that is so cool to hear. I know for me, I had done some values work really intentionally, probably back in 2019. That completely changed the trajectory of my entire life. I went through a program and experience, and it was interesting because before I did it, I knew a number of people who had done it. And the thing that I noticed about all of the alumni was that they walked around with this sense of clarity and alignment. And I was like, I don't really understand what you did to get here, but I want it. I want what she's having. And I feel like once I actually went through the process of really defining my values for myself and like rules, for lack of a better word, around when I would feel like I was living in alignment with them, it really opened up like so much unexpected space for self-trust and possibility. For people who are listening to us who might not be familiar with chosen values, let's start with a definition. What are chosen values in your words?
Yeah, I use the term chosen values, which I may not have come up with myself. I haven't really done a lot of research on that, but it just felt so natural to call them chosen values because everyone has values, right? We all have inherited values, whether it's from our family, our friends, our jobs, our religion. We're all raised with values. And I think about chosen values as like this pivotal point in our lives where we really stop to take inventory and think, okay, am I going to continue to live in alignment with these inherited values, with these beliefs that I have just been brought up with or been aligning my life to this point? Or am I going to really get clear on what my chosen values are? Like you were saying, like have this intentional moment of determining, exploring them, and allow myself to have that agency to move about my life with those chosen values as the guide. And so that's really what I mean when I say chosen values, and what I teach through my programs and my coaching is really slowing down to get curious, doing an inventory about, what it is that drives us, and then making that selection of what our chosen values are, and then integrating them into our lives.
I love that so much. And I think to your point, like the metaphor that I found really impactful in thinking about this and describing it is like we're all running software that maybe we picked up along the way that we didn't choose. Often it's just like, we downloaded the free update when our computer said it was time. And so we're running all these programs in the background that we may not even be aware are there. And when we start to bring some awareness and curiosity to what that programming is, we may realize that we picked up some stuff that's really not serving us, that made a lot of sense at the time, but is not helping us now. And so we get to decide what programming we want to keep or what the upgrade is, what the reboot is that we want to move forward with. And it can completely change so much, as you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about that choice. It's not like a total refresh or a restart, like a hard restart. Like we're not doing that necessarily. We're like looking at what we want to continue to bring forward as our values, and then what new things might there be, or what aspirational things might there be that we really want to be intentional about prioritizing in our lives, making decisions by showing up in a way that is with that choice.
I love that. Well, and I know that you and your story have been so informed by this process. I feel like the reason why you do what you do is that I know you've had transformation across so many dimensions of your life as a result of being really thoughtful and intentional about choosing your values. So I would really love to hear your story and how you got here. And the invitation is really like, please take up space because I know some of this. I'm sure I'll learn something. And I think it's just like such an interesting and inspiring example of what this looks like really practically and tangibly, or what it can look like for folks.
So my entrepreneurial journey really started as a self-development journey. When I turned 30, I started therapy for the first time. I was experiencing depression in a deep way that I had never experienced before. And I was realizing how wildly out of alignment some of my relationships were and myself were. Maybe some people would say it was just my Saturn return, or I was just in a space where I was really becoming hyper aware, like could not look away and emotionally couldn't really move past it without support. So I started therapy, and it took a couple of years to really arrive at these tools of values to guide me in a way that was really transformational. So a couple years into therapy, still feeling, unfulfilled and stuck and very lonely, specifically in my then long-term relationship. I was putting other people like above myself. I was just feeling like I was progressing, but not in these really, really deep feelings. And my therapist at the time said to me, it sounds like you and my then boyfriend just have different values. And it was like clarity, like I had never seen clarity before. It was such a gift to be told these things. Not only were values something that I just really hadn't thought about or were talked about or was something that was like in the front of my mind that I could articulate, it was this almost like permission to start to put myself first and to give myself agency of like, no, I'm able to say what it is that I want. And I'm able to take action on those things, those values, and make choices based off of them. So supported by more therapy and coaching and reading and podcasts and friends, family, I really set out to explore like who I am and get really curious about showing up as that authentic self across all areas of my life. And so within a month of kind of getting this like strong insight from my therapist, I left the city of San Francisco where I was living for about a decade and moved to Nashville, which was where I had grown up. And I ended that long-term relationship. I just made a choice like, this is out of alignment. I know what I need. It's not this. And I made that move. Within 6 months, I had spent a lot of time going really deep and discovering what my chosen values are. And I used them at that point, 6 months into living actually in my childhood bedroom. I was like, okay, I'm ready for like connection. I like feel like I know who I am now. I've done this discovery. And I put myself out there and found my now fiance with my values. It allowed me to really like start at the foundation, aligning on the things that mattered most to me and him.
Can I interject there? Because I also feel like you kind of glossed over, like, I know it's like, to me, it's so awesome how you found your partner with your values. Do you mind like adding a little more detail there?
Of course. Yeah, happy to share. I had kind of created this process for myself as like a, mix of all these learnings I had taken to really get clear on my values. And part of that was like not only just determining what my values were, but defining them in like a detailed way that was going to be my roadmap for how I was going to live them. And so this was in 2020, maybe 2021 at this point, early 2021. It was the middle of the pandemic, right? We didn't have a vaccine yet. I had been in a 7-year relationship before this. I did not know how to go about finding my partner. And so I was like, okay, a dating app. I'll use a dating app. And I ended up creating a profile on Bumble that was just my values, like a, screenshot from my phone of like what my values were and what those definitions, that roadmap was, to a Bumble profile with like not a picture, not anything else, really didn't answer any of the prompts they gave because I thought I was like putting my heart and soul on this profile. I was like, this is everything. These are the keys. And ended up getting flagged. I had to put a photo up because I guess that's like a rule that they have. But long story short, I found my fiance through that post. Like I kind of created it like a science experiment. I was like, I am going to sit down and look at my matches and like really intentionally like think about, do they align with these values? And I started a conversation with my now fiance, and that conversation was so rich and so deep out of the gate. The things we uncovered the first night of texting back and forth were things that I hadn't discussed in past relationships until like, the 6th day, the 3rd month, like whatever, so deep into that relationship. But out of the gate, we were able to like really be vulnerable, really be open, and be very clear about what it is that we wanted and who we are. And it's been amazing. It created such a foundation of trust and understanding and alignment of who we are and what we're looking for.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I love that story so much. And like, hi, Bumble, if you're listening. Such a fun success story. So I feel like we didn't get to like from there to how you got to where you are today because I totally interrupted you.
No.
I'd love to come back. So you had this experience and you met the person who is now your fiance through your values. We're in like early 2021-ish. Then what?
Yeah, so things started opening up from there with these tools and my values. I noticed so much more confidence and clarity around what I was doing. And a couple years later, I started to realize, okay, I was in a corporate job. I was working full time as a social impact leader at a tech company. And I started to realize that the company I was at was starting to feel out of alignment with what my values are. My colleagues and who I was spending the most time with at work were starting to feel that conflict of values. And I really recognized burnout coming on fast. And with the support of my new therapist, I ended up taking medical leave from that job because it just got to a point of where I was so unwell and ultimately made the decision to leave and really work on my mental health and ultimately pursue a more aligned career. So I started consulting after that. And then about a year ago, I started to work on launching this business of helping others do this practice of values aligned living authentically, and really helping them uncover what drives them. It was so apparent that values were such a key to unlocking all of this rewarding change in my life. And I really wanted to help other people do that. And here I am.
It's just so clear how you are doing values work in alignment with your own values in such a cool way. And I'm curious, I know so much of the work that you do is helping people navigate transitions. Once someone has done the work and sat down and gotten clear on what their chosen values are, what does it look like to actually meaningfully incorporate them into things like life and work?
Yeah, I think about integration in what I call the magic three: yourself, relationships, and your work. And so I walk people through what it looks like to incorporate that into those three areas of their life, starting with like inventory and reflection. What does it look like to behave in a way that honors your values? What does it look like to behave in a way that is outside of your values? Really thinking about what it feels like in your body to be fully living your values and how you can prioritize that in different areas of your life. For relationship, who in your life is supporting your efforts to live in alignment with your values? And where might there be some misalignment? And how might you communicate what your values are to improve the alignment? And then work is thinking about, are you doing a job that is honoring your values, in alignment with your values? Are you working with people who honor who you are? Are you able to show up authentically as yourself at work? Or are you maybe trying to fit in and do things the way that the company requires that, is a little bit different than who you want to show up as? So that's really that like first step of inventory and reflection. And then the next step is creating a roadmap. So really with the reflections of those questions and more, really thinking about like what are table stakes scenarios like that you are just unable to budge. It would be completely outside of who you are and what drives you. And thinking about what are areas where you might be able to compromise across yourself, relationships, and work. So where might you be comfortable compromising a part of what drives you in order to be in a relationship or be in your career? What's on or off the table? And then what does that look like in practice? Like, when do you experience your values? And that really becomes that roadmap that you can follow throughout your day, your week, your year, your life of like, when am I living my values? And then the last piece is around pursuing goals. So there's a big part of my How to Live Authentically workshop where we focus on goal setting in alignment with your values and really considering if you're pursuing a goal that is in alignment or out of alignment and like what that feels like, what that can look like, who's going to support you, how are you going to stay accountable to reach those goals.
Oh, I love that. And I'm curious if you'd be up for giving, and this can be an example from your own values or an example from someone you've worked with's list of values, but can you give us, just to make this like super tangible, an example of what a value might be and how someone might then experience or intentionally experience that and align their goals with that value?
Yeah, of course. So I can use my own personal example for this or my values. So one of my values is being open to experiences. And my definition, which is completely unique to me, you won't find it in a dictionary or online or whatever. If you were to Google open to experiences, like this is defined by me. Open to experiences for me is the willingness to pursue my passions and explore new things and pushing past any fear that comes up in that process. And so for me, an example of a goal that this value really helped guide me in what to do next was the step of creating, this coaching business to support others and exploring, what's important to them, what drives them. So I had a lot of, friendly conversations the year before I started, in between leaving my job and starting Chosen Directions. A lot of people, friends, family, colleagues would ask me like, what did you do to create all this change in your life? Like, what steps did you take? What changed? And I would always share, I got really clear on what my values are and allowed them to guide me in all of these big, areas and decisions of my life. 9 out of 10 times I would say this, someone would say, what are my values? And I heard it enough times where I was like, okay, if I wasn't alone in this, feeling that this was like a new concept, a new tool that could really help me, and, these people that I adore are validating that they're not clear on their values as well, maybe there's something that I can do to help them. Like I created my practice, which now is, my workshop, independently. It was kind of like, taking a lot of different ingredients and putting it together in a way that worked for me. So I thought, okay, maybe I can help them. So I thought about this value of being open to experiences. I was like, well, I don't know what this could look like, but I'm going to be open to exploring this. So over the course of 6 months, I started working on putting together that practice into a workbook. It ended up being like a sequential, steps of what to do. And then I thought, okay, well, now I need to take people through it and make sure it helps them. It helped me, but I want to make sure it helps other people. So I hosted a pilot program with 8 people and group workshops and individual workshops and put them through the workshop. And that became my goal, is to test out this workbook, and it helped them. And then, ultimately the goal became to create, a version of this that people could participate in that weren't my friends and family and launch a business. And so that value of being open to experience kept being the big yes sign of should I pursue this goal or should I not? And there was a lot of things that I had to consider too while pursuing it. This is kind of what comes into play of that compromise concept of how you integrate your values and think about compromise. Another value of mine is quality time with my chosen family. And so while pursuing this goal of creating Chosen Directions, creating the workbook, creating the workshop, I knew that I was going to have to compromise that value a little bit in order to really focus on building this. I knew that it was going to take my time, my resources, and I wouldn't have as much time or quality time to get to spend with my family. So that was something that I was aware of and I was okay with. And I was able to communicate, right, to people in my life that I care about.
I love how that example ties to so much of your story and the work that you do. And it's, again, so concrete and so tangible, and very much explains how you've come to be where you are today. I also know that, like, personal development and healing journeys, like, often come with challenges along the way, which I, on my better days, recognize as gifts. And on harder days, I'm like, why is this here? I'm curious, if you're up for sharing, like, what was the most challenging part of your self-development journey, and how do you see this showing up for the people that you work with today?
Such a good question. So, if I think back on my early days, I think the self-development journey never ends, the healing journey never ends. But if I think back on early days, becoming self-aware that there were ways that I was showing up that needed to change took the longest, was the hardest part of it. I was so comfortable in my routine. My beliefs were so ingrained, and it was really, really the hardest part for me was to become aware enough that there was another way to do this, because I just couldn't see that at that point in time. And I hear a lot of that in the people I work with too. It takes a moment to get to that spot where you're like, this isn't working. I think I've tried everything. I really need to create some change and try something new. I hear that a lot. And it's the catalyst for the reward at the other end. Like, it can feel really risky to change things, but it really has that reward payoff to be living your most fulfilled life, to be showing up authentically is the most rewarding thing I've gotten to do in my adult life so far.
Totally. It reminds me of something my therapist has said. We change when the cost of inaction becomes greater than the cost of change.
Yeah, that's powerful. I remember saying to someone recently that I'm working with, it's like, there's no going back from here. And you wouldn't want to go back, right? Like, it's like perhaps some work to be put in to implement what you're learning. And that can feel hard, but there's no going back, and you're going to be so rewarded by that work at the end.
Absolutely. I hope you're enjoying this episode. I wanted to jump in here and let you know that we are hosting our next free Girls Club Collective Community Power Hour on Friday, August 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you are craving connection with like-hearted leaders and founders in sustainability, social impact, or ESG, this is the room that you want to be in. You'll be connected to other fantastic change agents. Don't worry, we'll provide conversation starters too. And you'll have a chance to ask questions about our upcoming cohort of the Girls Club Collective. We love growing this beautiful community so much, and we can't wait to connect you to our constellation of women changing the world. You can sign up on our website at girlsclubcollective.co/community-power-hour, or via the link in the show notes. I am so excited to meet you virtually in person on Friday, August 9th. Now, back to the episode. Well, I know that you found that this type of work, as you alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, can be especially impactful for people who are navigating transitions, which can be like all sorts of transitions: life transitions, work transitions, relationship transitions, age milestones, becoming parents, so many things. What is it about transitions that makes this work so potent?
I think it's a few things. When you're going through a transition, there's a lot of questioning going on. What am I doing this for? What am I hoping will happen at the other end of this? It can be hard to grasp the other side of change. And so that questioning is a really right place for getting curious internally rather than externally about what you're anticipating or what you're experiencing. I also think that when there is a transition or a change, there can be a lot of fear around making the wrong choice, right? Transition can feel permanent or just a big shift in how we're used to going about our lives. And there's an element of choice there, right? You get to choose to leave a job. Often, sometimes we don't get to choose, or you get to choose to look for a new job, right? And when you are making those choices and you don't have a clear guide that is helping you choose which direction you're going to take in that choice, it can be, a real time for like exploration and discovery, looking for that internal compass that's going to confidently and clearly like give you the tools to make that choice in a very empowering way that is, without a doubt in alignment with what it is that you want. I think the last thing that at least is true for me, speaking from my experience in the transition, is when you make a big change like this, external factors or people can play a big role if you don't have that clear internal compass. Like really being worried about what other people are going to think about you, are going to think about your choices, like everyone sees everything these days in the world of the internet of, oh, what is someone going to think if I did that or make that decision? And another, opportunity to get really clear on like what's that internal guidance system that is making that transition or change with confidence, with intention, and really giving you that agency to stop worrying about what others think and allowing yourself to guide those big changes or decisions.
That makes so much sense. It feels like there's an element of really like anchoring into our self-trust and knowing and feeling confident in why we're making the decisions that we're making, especially amidst transitions and pivotal moments. I think can really help orient us to what's actually important to us. It's so funny how often I'm in conversation with people. We talk about like what quote unquote they say or what they will think. And we're like, who is they? They is like in so many cases made up in our heads, but also sometimes very real people. But especially when it's like a made up they. Once we start paying attention to that, it's like, oh, why am I trying to please this like random fake them as opposed to myself? But it requires some introspection. I know it's not a natural thought for me to go immediately there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like a reflex, right? Like if you don't have that internal clarity, you're of course going to worry about the external piece because like that's what's there. That's what's taking up space. And so I think what you're saying is like, is anyone even thinking about you? Is anyone even judging this decision or moment? Like, likely not, but it's that perception, it's that possibility that takes up all the space because you're lacking in the scenario that internal clarity, that internal guide. Having that clarity, having a clear internal compass takes up all that other space of worrying about what's happening on the outside.
Absolutely. I'm sure there are people who are listening to this who are like, okay, like I hear you. Clearly, I need to choose my values. Where would you suggest someone who's listening who is having that like values? What are my values moment? Where can they begin?
Yeah. I always encourage people to start with getting curious and asking themselves these 3 questions. The first one is, what's important to you? And you can get to the answer of this by really thinking about, how you spend your time, even how you spend your money, what you like to do, who you're spending your time with. Like, what are you prioritizing right now? What's important to you? And the second question is, what's energizing you? So imagining when you feel like the absolute best version of yourself, what are you doing? Who are you with? How does it feel? What are those attributes? And like really getting curious about that. And if you're asking yourself these questions right now, you might start to realize there's some overlap. And that's good. Like that's the point. You're starting to get clear about what are these different characteristics or feelings or things that are coming to the surface. And then the third question is, what do you aspire towards? So what is it that motivates you? What is perhaps your purpose? And what are those ways of showing up that you maybe aren't doing right now, but you really aspire towards showing up in this way? And so this is, a great thing to journal about. I always encourage you do it with a pencil and paper so you can really put it down on paper. It just comes out different when you're using analog form of writing than on your computer. And once you have this, in writing, really sitting with it and reflecting on what you discovered through those 3 different questions, seeing what words or what themes come to the surface. Did anything show up more than once across those different questions? What are those words? What are those, characteristics? What are those attributes? Those are likely the first draft of your chosen values. Those words that are coming up multiple times, or the words that come off the page and you're like, yes, full body, yes, this is what I value. And then thinking about those that are coming to the surface and trying them on, right? Thinking about what you could do in the next week that brings one of those values to the surface. I like to call them like an act of authenticity. If you want to try it on, see how it makes you feel, see if it, sparks anything. And, going through the different values that you have on that page and trying that across the next several weeks could be a really fun way to feel into and experience those values in your life. I also created a quiz. So if you're not sure if you have clear chosen values, maybe you feel like you do, but you're curious to get a little bit deeper into what that looks like, I have a quiz on my website that you can take, and it will kind of give you an end result of if you have clear values, unclear, or somewhere in the middle.
I am a sucker for a quiz, and I have taken the quiz and totally recommend it if you're wanting a fun way to check in with yourself on how clear and chosen your values are. Well, changing topics a little bit, but adjacent, I have to say again, I've so loved having you on my team at GCC. There aren't enough words for how much fun it's been to collaborate with you, and I can't say enough nice things. I also feel like when I think about what makes GCC special to me, our values are a huge part, I think, of what makes our community so special. And I'm so curious, given your wisdom and expertise and like the seat that you sit in, both doing values work with your clients and being a part of our community, what do you think the relationship between community and chosen values is?
I love this question and that you're thinking about this, but of course you're thinking about this. And I also want to pause and say how amazing you are and how magical Girls Club Collective is and how privileged and honored I am to get to work alongside of you. You're a gift on so many levels, and I know I gush about it privately to you, but I'm so pleased to get to share it publicly too, of how important you are, not to me only, but to so many people. And we're lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you, Drew. Don't make me cry on the podcast. You can totally make me cry on the podcast. But
I wouldn't expect anything else from you, Liz. So yeah, community and chosen values. When I think about community, I think about it as a choice, right? It's like the people we get to choose who we spend time with, who we give and receive support to, where you ideally get to show up as your authentic self. Like that's my dream community. And that's the community that you built inside Girls Club Collective. And that's like the tie that I see with values is like, if you're not clear about what it is or who you are, what drives you or who you are, how are you going to find your community, right? You can feel into a community. You can kind of feel if the energy's there, if it feels like something that feels good to be around. But just having those clear values, and Girls Club Collective has such strong, clear values as a community that allows people to really understand like what it is that they're opting into and if it's in alignment with who they are and what drives them. Yeah, I think that is just such a beautiful marriage of how community can feel so safe and so fulfilling, and lucky to be a part of that at Girls Club Collective.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Drew. That's so generous, and it really means a lot. And I so value your reflection and perspective on that, because even in thinking about your 3 layers of values, right? There's your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others, a relationship to your work, if I'm capturing the circles correctly. And if that recognizes that we ideally don't live on an island or in a vacuum. And so much of what it looks like to express ourselves is in relation to both other people and to how we spend our time, which for many of us involves work in some capacity, whether it's paid or unpaid work. I mean, it's so special to me to hold space where I know so many of us are so committed to like holding up mirrors for each other to reflect back each other's awesomeness. And I've certainly been in communities where like the mirrors, for lack of a better metaphor, like weren't the right shape for me. like I feel like what was valued was not in alignment with what is important to me as a human, as a founder, as a coach, as a leader. Yeah, it's been really cool to see what has been possible when we come together around this like organizing principle of our values and reflect all this light back at each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And it starts with the leader, for lack of a better word, and that's you, right? Like you as an individual have such strong, clear values. And I believe that that allows you to create something like GCC that also reflects those strong values, that attracts the people that are driven by similar values. I'm curious if that played a role in that community element that you've so carefully curated at Girls Club.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, in my own personal values, there's definitely a lot of overlap in news that won't surprise you. Love, magic, curiosity, creativity. Like these are all things that are in my like at the top of my radiance, at the top of my values list. And I think it's also been a really fun exercise in birthing an entity that is separate from me, in giving Girls Club Collective like its own values that are like informed by and like inspired by my own personal values, but that also reflects the community and like the constellation of change agents that we've been informally building since long before this had a formal home.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a great mix of you and the leaders and the community.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like I'm so inspired by our members. Well, I mean, I could talk to you forever, and I get to. So I feel like I'm so lucky. I did want to ask a couple more questions before we wrap up today. One is my favorite question to ask on the podcast because this is the Women Changing the World podcast. I have to ask, if you could change one thing about the world, what is the one thing that you would most want to change?
Yeah, I would want to change or see a shift in what fascinates us or what we're obsessed with. I feel like we're obsessed with like celebrities and like influencers and like status. And I want to go from like celebrity status influencer obsessed to authenticity obsessed. Like I want the people who are showing up real and raw and clear on who they are to be the most interesting, followed, biggest platforms in the world.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool. What a different world that would be and how fun that would be to follow along with. The other question I love asking on the podcast is a younger self advice question. I think so often, I'm sure there's someone listening who, in some way, shape, or form, could identify with or would resonate with like a version of past you. And I'm curious if you could give past you any one piece of advice, what would you most want to tell her?
Yeah, I was reflecting on past me because my birthday was yesterday. And
Happy birthday.
thank you. And my self development and therefore entrepreneurial journey started really close to my birthday years ago. And just thinking about like, younger me and how sad she was and how lonely she was, but how hopeful she was. And I guess a mixture of so much good is coming your way, like follow your heart, do what feels right to get there because you're going to get there. And an element that I'm only kind of really embodying in the last 6 months ish is surrender more, move from that headspace of like forcing thinking, doing, to like the heart space of feeling and loving and trusting, and let the rest kind of follow from there.
Always on a surrender journey over here. And I so love that advice. Thank you. Well, for people who are listening, who are like, oh my goodness, I need more Drew in my life, I need more values in my life, where is the best place for people to find you, follow you, and keep up with you?
I have all of the information, like links to my LinkedIn and Instagram on my website, chosendirections.com. I also have a monthly How to Live Authentically newsletter that you can subscribe to from my website, or offer free exploration calls if anything I shared is interesting. And I also host quarterly events that go into some of these themes and are, group activities, a way to meet people who are asking themselves these same questions. And those are always on my website too.
Amazing. Well, I can totally put in a strong plug. I have so loved reading your newsletter and following along with your content. So really recommend for anyone who's listening here. I've learned so much from Drew about values. I'm so excited to learn even more from you inside GCC this summer. So definitely go check out her website. There's like so much more magic that we barely scratched the surface. Thank you so much, Drew, for being on the podcast today. Again, it's such an honor and a privilege, and I feel so lucky to have you in my world.
Oh, the feeling is so mutual. Thank you for having me. This was such a joy to be with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you're currently listening to it, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at liz.best, that's lis.best, and you can find Girls Club Collective at girls_club_collective. You can also find us on LinkedIn by searching for Liz Best, that's my name, LASBEST, and Girls Club Collective. Join our mail list by visiting the Girls Club Collective homepage and scrolling down to the bottom. You'll be in the loop on upcoming events, retreats, and opportunities to make magic with us, and you'll also receive a monthly love note from my heart to your inbox. I am so excited to keep in touch.